Hey, welcome back to the Urban Monk. I'm here with three individuals today. I read an article about this a while back, and then I emailed our show producer and said, please get me these people. This is fascinating stuff. Why? Because there's a group of concerned parents in the town that I live in that said, hey, wait a minute, there's glyphosate, there's all sorts of like crazy things that are being sprayed on public lands, and they're putting our kids in danger. And so they went after it, they went after the city council, they went after the mayor, and they got the stuff banned. They partnered up with Dr. Bruce Blumberg, who is a local university professor, so they armed themselves with data. They went in there and they got it done. So I want you to watch this, I want you to pay close attention, and I want you to then think about what you can do in your community to make the same change happen, and these people are gonna help you. Enjoy the show. But we're gonna be talking about parents and what parents can do. Because for me, there's also like this mama bear energy, which is one of the most powerful things out there on the planet, right?
It is the most powerful thing on the planet.
90%
right?
of our people who responded to our survey were women who we click through on our links and on all our campaigns. So it's definitely women who participate in this kind of thing.
What, so guys just don't give a shit. Like it's really hard. It's the same thing in the doctor's office, right? Like my wife made me come, right?
I think it's that moms care more.
We're
Moms
invested.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when we talked about this earlier, right? It was just like how, my wife was going to go onto the board, right? Because I'm over here, I love this stuff, and it's like I kind of like put my wife forward to go like do that stuff, and maybe it's just like old division of labor stuff that's kind of hanging around, because I care a lot about this, but like my wife will like draw a knife over this, right? Like don't mess with my cubs.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm just so enthused about what you all have done. Because this isn't some sort of huge lobby that you put together. This isn't some mass like organization thing. Got a couple of concerned moms who then went and found a local university professor and said, hey, this looks kind of scary. We don't want this around our kids. So can you give me just a little bit of the background on how this kind of came together?
Well, chronologically speaking, that's not exactly how it happened. But you got the gist of it right. So basically, we have 5 board members, and we all came together mostly last September is when we really started working together hard on this issue. We'd each been kind of thinking about it and working on it in our own ways. I, within my HOA, had seen the use of these chemical pesticides in my neighborhood and was really concerned about it. And so I had made enough noise about it and helped them to stop using them in my neighborhood. And then because of that noise that I had made, I managed, someone I knew from school, from my daughter's school, connected me with another woman who had been working in the Irvine PTA on the issue. And so, and that woman's name is Kathleen Halal, and she brought a lot of us together. Kim connected with her also, and then a dad who was important also. And so that's how we kind of found each other. And then after we connected, then we kind of sat down and looked at what was happening in the school district in particular. That's where we started initially as our goal, was to stop the use of these chemicals at the schools, where it's obviously very concerning to have your kids exposed. But then as we started to think about it, we said, well, geez, why not the city too? And then, down the list, why not round up the whole, pardon the expression.
Collect, organize.
Yeah. So I mean, in schools, they're like obviously in captivity. So you've got these chemicals, your kids are exposed to them, and you don't really have a choice. They're just gonna like take the burden. So let me just, let's draw a circle around these chemicals. What is it that you've identified are like the really big bad guys that most of these schools or municipalities are spraying?
Glyphosate, and my sons, I have 2 boys at Canyon View, and they were marking the track for them to run. So we're encouraging them to be in this 100-mile club program to go out and get exercise. And what they did is they were literally just spraying a track with Roundup and glyphosate. It was just
come on
to kill the grass, seriously.
Just so they knew where to
kids running on the grass won't do it.
So I started doing my research on it, and that's when I got upset, and the president of the PTA at Canyon View put me in touch with Kathleen. But I think the biggest thing for me is when I found out they were using 2,4-D on Harvard Baseball Park. And I have a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old that slide in the dirt, playing in the dirt. They inhale the dirt. And I left that meeting crying. I was just...
2,4-D for our audience?
Agent Orange.
Well, it's half of the 2,4-D is half of the active ingredients in Agent Orange. It's in a product called Speed Zone, and that also contains a number of other really toxic ingredients, dicamba, mecroprop, and a few others too.
And some they don't list.
Yeah, some inert ingredients also, which they say are inert, which is part of the problem that and Dr. Blumberg could talk about this, but any pesticide that is registered, they evaluate the single ingredient, but then not the other ingredients that are in the formulation and the interactions between them. So while 2,4-D is toxic on its own, how toxic is it when used in combination with Roundup and dicamba and these other things? And the answer is we don't know.
And it was purely for weed abatement. It was purely for cosmetic
Aesthetics.
reasons.
Right,
Yeah,
to get rid of
aesthetics.
dandelions because they don't look pretty in the field.
Dandelions are not part of our urban planning here. So let's just be clear, nature's
Okay.
ugly, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just this weird thing about
that's the
like
point.
stewardship over nature, and this is how I want this park to look. And so what are we talking about? So Ayn, Kim, and the group come to you, and you're a professor at UC Irvine.
UC Irvine, yeah.
And so you have looked at all this, and you're kind of on the front lines of it. So what is this stuff?
Real quick to back up, we were lucky enough to find Bruce, but we originally, when we formed as a team, we knew we wanted to have a brand. So we wanted everybody, if they saw a Facebook post or if they saw a flyer from us, we wanted them to be able to find us and know that we're the same group and they can reach out to us. So we actually found Little Things Matter, a video that Dr. Bruce Blumberg did, and I contacted him just asking if we could possibly use his logo, which is the child, which shows the body burden. So each dot represents the chemicals and everything they were mentioning and how they, from conception until death, how they're like in our system. And we just thought that would be great for our logo. So he said, not only can you use it, I'll have my brother who's a graphic designer do the logo for you, and I'd be happy to be your advisor. So that's what started it all. And then his really close friend, Dr. Dean Baker, who's at UCI, he said, he's local, reach out to him. And we talked to Dr. Baker, and he's like, I'll be your advisor too. Let's have a meeting. And then we contacted Bruce. And we were lucky. We're batting 1,000. We had these dream experts on.
I don't know how lucky you are. I mean, listen, there's this team good, right? And everyone's trying to be like, hey, how about we stop poisoning, and how about we have a better world, and how about we don't build a Death Star, and all the kind of things that are like out there in the meme. And we all kind of feel that way. And so it's like, yeah, I'm in, right? And so they come to you, and so you bring the hard science to this. And so what is it? Like, how bad is this stuff?
Difficult to say just how bad it is. We know that many of these pesticides, herbicides, fungicides are toxic in a variety of ways. Some of them are what we call endocrine disruptors, which is my area of expertise. Chemicals disrupt the natural function of the endocrine system. And there are a huge number of adverse health outcomes associated with that. So when they reached out to me, I said, of course I'm going to help you, because I believe passionately that the only way this will ever change is by moms standing up and shouting. So how could I not support a group of moms who are doing just that? The EPA is not going to protect us, the FDA is not going to protect us, the Department of Agriculture is not going to protect us, because they have a different worldview. Their worldview is to prevent poisoning, right? To prevent these chemicals from causing people to die.
Immediately.
And they do a pretty good job of that. The chemicals that we're using do not cause people to die for the most part within a few days. But what they totally don't consider are the long-term effects. What happens over 20 years of exposure? What happens if you expose a child now? What happens 20 years from now, or 30 or 40? That's totally off of their radar. They ignore that. So right now there's a battle being waged between the endocrinology community and the toxicology community. Right? And the toxicologists mostly represent the industry and government regulators.
And lethal dose.
Yeah, so they're just worried about poisoning, and then they say, well, this doesn't poison them, therefore all the other effects are trivial. And we would say, no, that's not true. You don't ever even examine the low dose effects. You don't watch over the lifetime. You're only looking at short-term acute effects. And by the way, the companies that are making this stuff are the ones who are supporting the work or who are doing the studies that government relies on. And we know the ugly history of industry with respect to being honest about safety.
Yeah.
We have only to look at recent examples, Volkswagen, Takata with their exploding airbags, GM with their ignitions, the tobacco industry. It goes on and on and on. We cannot trust industry to test the safety of the products they produce.
So industry is never going to police itself correctly. That's just not in their self-interest. And then we have the EPA, we have the FDA, we have all these different kind of agencies that we've propped up there.
Yep.
And so let's talk about the revolving door a little bit, just because, you know, I want to make it abundantly clear that the organizations and the agencies that we have out there that are supposed to be protecting us are really falling short, and therefore it's like that's why mama bear revolutions are happening, right?
Right. Part of that's because of worldview, right? So the people that are doing the government regulators, the people that are making the decisions about which chemicals are allowed and at what doses, have this dose makes the poison worldview, right? So we start with a huge amount of chemical and we kill all the test subjects, not people, but, you know, animals, plants, things like that. And you drop down, you find a dose that only kills half of them. Okay, that's the lethal dose 50, the LD50. Then you find a dose that has hardly any effect. That's the lowest observed effect level. Then you go a little bit below that and say, oh, there's no effect. We didn't poison anyone.
Safe.
Therefore, then they apply a safety factor, that usually 100. So divide that number by 100, and that's the human exposure. Boom, ready to go. And it's all based on tests that are done by the companies. And they don't have to disclose, they don't publish those results. Those are trade secrets. So all of human health levels of a variety of chemicals are based on unpublished, top secret data by the companies that make the stuff.
And the EPA then approves it. And I think it's
The
just
EPA looks at that and they
education,
say, yeah,
because
sounds good to us.
as a parent, you look at the signs that the schools put up, and they have, you know, warnings and an EPA registered number. And they just assume that if the school is putting it out, if the EPA has approved this product, that it's safe for the children. And again, I think it's very powerful when you look at how a child interacts with their environment and how they just, you know, they play harder, they're in the grass, and all these things aren't factored in. So as a parent, you know, you walk by, you look at the sign, you think, okay, EPA approved this product.
Someone's got my back.
Yeah.
Must be fine.
Yep.
Someone's
The
looking
school
out
signed
for me.
off on
Yeah.
this. They're okay.
The medical community also thinks that if the EPA has said it's safe at this level, that it's safe at that level.
Yeah. Well, the medical community is also being educated by the pharmaceutical community.
Well, at least in the pharmaceutical area, there's real testing done.
Yep.
And you can argue with how perfectly it works, but it's testing done by independent people, so clinical trials. Obviously can't do clinical trials on exposing people to pesticides and seeing what level's safe and what level's not.
Yeah.
That's just not doable.
We did in
It's just
Vietnam.
happening in real
Yeah,
time.
we did that. Well,
Right.
we didn't test the dose, we just gave it to everyone. And
Yeah, I know. It's so scary to me that this is even a conversation we need to have in the time that we live. So what do we see? I mean, I've had a lot of kind of endocrinology conversations on the show, and especially on the Health Bridge over time, about what these endocrine disruptors do. They become obesogens, they become carcinogens. There's a lot of things that are...
They disrupt.
They disrupt the flow of this thing called life inside of our cellular mechanism. So have you guys had anything personally touch your lives? I mean, do you have any kids with allergies, asthma, you know, anyone on the board? I mean, this is,
Well,
let's bring this close to home here.
We lived in Bermuda. We moved to Irvine because it was the safest. You know, it's safest.
Crime safest.
Right.
Right.
But
Yeah.
best schools
That's what
and
they say.
safest.
But it
so you're
implies
safe.
totally safe.
Right. You're
Right.
safe from a drive-by, but you're not safe from, you know, your kids inhaling 2,4-D every baseball game, every practice, and it was heartbreaking. Like, I remember after our first meeting, we found out about 2,4-D. I just felt like a bad mom. Like, how did I not know that? How did I let my kids play that many hours? And just, I felt like I failed them. So I remember calling my husband crying, saying, we're pulling him from baseball. Like, I love you. We'll look into soccer or somewhere where it's maybe
Swimming.
basketball indoors, right?
Yeah.
Away from this.
Yeah, swimming.
And my dad played for the New York Yankees, and even he got it. He's like, okay, we take one season off. You have to move. So I knew that we had to have this change or we were leaving Irvine.
But
It
you know
just
what,
wasn't-
frankly, there's really nowhere to hide if this is in all these municipalities and we get to the point where we have to make decisions based on like taking a stand. So for me, it's like, you get, and I want to get into this, and I'm gonna have you kind of walk us through this, is you decide this thing and then you start going to the city council and all this. I really want to unpack how you were able to succeed in this, because I want everyone who's watching this to say, hey, wait a minute, I want this for my town, and that's enough is enough. And so it might be very different. It might be played out very differently in town down the road, but the methodology and the intent behind what you've done, I think, should drive a revolution, and we're going to help you guys get other parents to do this.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're ready. We're ready to help.
And we have non-toxic Camden in the UK already. So after
we have been working with after the city council made its decision with regard to Irvine, there was this outpouring of people making those requests to us. Help me, I want this where I am. And so we've been creating logos for them. We wrote up a playbook, which is like a step-by-step guide to doing what we did, which we'd be happy to share with your listeners and viewers.
Please.
So they're ready to go. It's just
yeah, but we can talk through kind of the step-by-step. How we started.
Yeah.
We started, okay. So we started really, it was years ago. I was looking back at some notes. In 2012 is when I first contacted my HOA about it, because I had some miscarriages and was really, looking for answers, like anyone who's been through an experience like that, unexplained miscarriages and just devastating. And so 2012, then I did have a healthy child, and so was sidetracked and busy and didn't get to it, but then got back on track, connected with this group. And Kathleen Halal had been working on the PTA, and so that was our focus initially. And so we were kind of meeting with them, but at some point we felt like we were getting stonewalled. Kim had contacted them, Kathleen had contacted them separately, and we were getting this answer from them like, don't worry,
the same blanket
Irvine is the safest place to live. Of course your children are safe here. They're safe. We're doing everything we can do. And so we felt like, and we weren't getting any further. So we said, okay, we need to kind of up the game. So what we decided to do was start a petition on change.org. And I'd seen a lot of them like that, similar petitions, but pointing out sort of the reality of what was happening and asking the question, did you know that Irvine routinely uses chemicals that have been shown to lower IQ, cause cancer, cause reproductive effects? So we launched this petition. And the idea with that was to give people who maybe didn't have time to be on our board or participate so fully with us to voice their views to all the decision makers. So the school board members, the city council members. And so the nice thing about the change.org petition is that it automatically sends an email to each of those decision makers if you load in their email address each time someone signs the petition.
Boom.
Yeah.
Flutter.
So it was pretty powerful. We spent a lot of time between our first meeting in September and November 19th, when I finally pushed the button to launch the petition. We were going back and forth on the draft and what are we going to say here, and do we have all of our data? Yes. Are we certain that all of this science is credible, which was a big part of our focus, was making sure we don't want to say anything that we don't feel is 100% scientifically sound. But so we launched our petition November 19th, and then we came to find much later that it only took about a couple hundred signatures only. But somewhere there in November, after we'd reached around 300 signatures, the mayor had enough emails that he reached around to the landscape supervisor for the city and said, what's going on here? Can you look into this? And then I think just out of a sense of his own career preservation, the superintendent said, okay, let's just stop. Let's not do anything else. So we didn't find out about that for 2 months later.
Pull the plug on all the chemicals.
On all the pesticides, yes, on all the chemical pesticides.
And that's how simple. So usually there's, like in other industries, there's a relationship between the guy at the chemical shop and the person. So there's a buyer, and there's hey, let's take you out to dinner and all that. This was just pull the plug because it's a small enough deal.
I think this is how it works in a lot of municipalities. Well, I don't know, in a lot of municipalities, but the city does not buy the product directly from the chemical manufacturer. They're not buying directly from, say, Monsanto or from PBI Gordon, which is what makes Speed Zone. They're using a landscape company, and so that's sort of the go-between. And so what we were just doing is giving voice to the consumers. We just were looking at the demand side. Well, let's create demand. Let's make visible the invisible, because in a lot of senses, all the stuff that's happening, it's literally invisible. Unless you're seeing the guy spraying it, then it's invisible. You're just not aware that it's ever happening. And then on the city council side, there are people, they're buying organic food and they're trying to do all these things to detoxify their children, but those actions and their desires are invisible to the city council. So our goal was to connect them. So let's show you that this is something that people care about. And so you might think that a couple hundred people, well, geez, this, Irvine has 250,000 people.
Okay, so you're talking 200 people out of 250,000 people, and then the mayor was like, holy crap, we got to do something about this.
Yeah, because it's quiet at City Hall. They don't hear from people. So
Right.
there's a sense that, well, I can't, I'm just one person. Right. And it's true, one person, it is a lot of work. It definitely helped that we were a team and we have some of the skill set that lends itself to this kind of a project from our career backgrounds. But I really think that if someone were committed enough and went about it in the way that we did, that they could achieve the same results.
Could you teach that skill set? Is there a
I think so.
methodology for that skill set? Because if I'm listening to this and I'm sitting in Wichita and I'm like, hell, I want to do that. Yeah. And I was like, oh, she said she has a skill set that I don't, so I'm just going to like,
It's all in the
Well,
playbook.
tell them about the
Just
skill
like
set
the
that you have.
petition.
yeah,
helps.
what is it? Exactly.
With
Okay.
the petition, like on move.org instead of a non-politically neutral petition site.
Right.
So it's little things like that that can help you keep the doors open instead of closed if you're approaching the entire city council.
One book that I really like that I worked in PR and corporate communications my whole career, and then I'm a stay-at-home mom now. I stepped out of the workforce like 7 years ago. So I've done a little consulting, but I've mostly been out of it. So I decided to check back in, and I read this book that I really liked that I used a lot of this guy's approaches for this work, and it's the book is called How Ideas Spread, and it's by a guy named Jonah Berger. He's at the Wharton School of Business, and he had a lot of really good insights about things like making the invisible visible and creating safety for people to feel like they can conform, how important conformity is, and so making it clear that City Council, we're not asking you to do something that no one's ever done before. This is something that they've done in all these other cities. Harvard University did it in 2008, and San Diego has made these parks organic, and these other areas are doing this, it's safe for you to do. And so I would recommend that as a resource. And then we are happy to make our petition available and the playbook and the link. So a lot of the work that we did on the research side has been done, and we can share that with folks who...
Great. Yeah, let's not reinvent the wheel. You guys did this. It's been successful. In a city of 250,000, that's not... we're not talking about Manhattan, but that's also a relatively, was that mid-sized city? I mean, it's not.
It's a large
lot of
city.
people.
It's
Yeah.
Irvine is the
Yeah.
safest
We're not
large
done
city.
yet though because
Yeah.
of all of the HOAs, just like your HOA and Irvine Company is willing, we had a very positive meeting with them. Dr. Bloomberg came with us and
The Irvine Company, which is a
Yes.
developer
Real
in the
estate
city of,
developer,
Biggest
Which
landlord in
So
Irvine.
there are a lot
I
of
just
moving...
my audience. Yeah.
There are a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of work that remains to be done. But so what we did was we started with the school district. We had our little victory with them. They agreed last May of 2015, to stop using glyphosate. And so, so then we had that to work with. They only agreed on glyphosate initially. I don't think they agreed on 2,4-D until later.
2,4-D only
More
for
recently.
fire. Yeah.
Okay.
Fire
So,
protection.
but the other thing that we did was we kind of leveraged these victories against each other. So then we could say, okay, so you agreed to stop using glyphosate, and then we shared with them how Quail Hill, which is a smaller community of 1,700 homes in Irvine, had stopped using all of the synthetic chemicals and pesticides and herbicides a year before. And so, see, they did that. So you can go one more. And then they agreed to a pilot program at one elementary school. And then we could go to the city, and we created this awareness among people, making the invisible visible, showing people what was really happening, and then showing the city council that these people were willing to voice their opinions on it and potentially vote based on those views. And then when we got to the point of actually being able to meet with the city, then we could say, well, the school district has taken these steps, and so can't you do, so we were kind of like building on from one success to the other. Yeah, friendly competition, because they
Building
are.
on your successes.
Exactly.
So you got this citywide, but there's private communities and private community parks within a given city that have their own kind of autonomy.
There are
Over 400
230 HOAs in Irvine, homeowners associations for folks who don't know. Each one with its own, each one its own little fiefdom with its own little board and its own little president and its own landscaping company. Of course, there's some overlap. There's a group of, I don't know how many landscaping companies that serve, but overlap between those communities. But so that's why I focused on my HOA initially, is because that's literally the space up to your front door and the sidewalk outside your house, and where I would see these masked workers spraying these chemicals all over the sidewalk, even up into the trees, is what got my awareness.
And the cancer cluster.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And in my neighborhood in particular, I know 3 children in my neighborhood who have been diagnosed with brain cancers and tumors of various varieties in the last 8 years. A community of 1,700.
Rare
Let
brain
me,
cancer.
let me comment on that for a moment. So the incidence of pediatric brain cancers nationwide is about 1 in 250,000. So Irvine has 250,000 citizens, and I think I calculated once there might be about 70,000 kids. So here we have 3 just in Quail Hill, but there's 15 throughout Irvine. So that is extraordinarily high compared to the national average. Could be a statistical fluke, or it could mean that there's a connection. And since there's a possible connection, why wouldn't you take the very simple step of eliminating a chemical that's known to cause cancer from the environment? That's just
What we
essentially a
found
no-brainer.
out. What we found
Frankly,
out.
Irvine, how dare you call yourself the safest city in America?
They're working on
Right?
it.
That's our point.
They're
yeah.
working on it.
Yeah, you don't get that, right? Because crime is I think the biggest crime is cellular crime, right? Like taking away your energy, taking away your health. So, okay, so we are in a place right now where you've actually moved this ahead. The city government has decided, okay, fine. And so there's a couple of these things pulled off the shelf. What are they using instead? Like it's like, well, what are we going to use? There's weeds. And so
Exactly. Well, we're not advocating a product for product replacement. This whole time we have been very specific with the alternative that we want, which I think was one of the keys to our success. We weren't just saying stop that. We said stop that and do this instead, which will be successful. And so that is a set of practices that includes things that are pretty low tech. It's like the use of appropriate turf height maintenance, overseeding, compost top dressing when you're looking at turf. When you're looking at plant wells and areas like that, it's like mulching so that the weeds they can't pop up. Use of compost teas and things like that. But it is a shift from doing ABC to XYZ, and it does require some training, and that's something that's on the calendar coming up soon in Irvine.
But it's also a shift in thinking. So the IUSD maintenance staff, they're great guys, and when they're out spraying, they would be used to me coming up and taking pictures and asking them what they're using, things like that. And to them, they're held up to, this is my job. I want to do my job well. They have pride in their work.
Sure.
And if I need to mark a track, I know that this works. I know Roundup will mark the track for 12 months, and it's, that's it, we're done. But then you just have to, I'd talk to them personally and say, well, it's not good for you. You're not wearing the right protection, and it's not good for the kids. And the problem is they're trained regularly by Monsanto, and they say, if you come to one meeting with me, you'll understand it's safe. They're constantly being told that it's safe.
Sure, yeah.
They'll tell you.
just talk to Monsanto.
Yeah,
Exactly. She heard those.
they got our back. Yes. So we disagree to disagree, and it's just a shift in thinking and re-educating kind of a new approach to how to do it and what their success is. They now know it's safer for the kids. They now know that they weren't wearing a lot of the proper gear and things to protect themselves.
And that it's lower cost over time. So the break even in terms of an organic and a conventional turf maintenance program, there's a really good study that we have a link to on our Pinterest page and we'll have on our website. But the break even mark is at 2.5 years if you look at a 5-year span where organic and conventional landscaping practices break even. A lot of it
Financially
is
break even.
Yes, right.
because
And then
of
it's cheaper afterwards.
And
it
it's
makes
cheaper afterwards.
yes.
And it uses 30% less water.
Largely because of the
we're in a
irrigation
drought.
savings.
Okay, sorry, so 30% less water, costs less money after 2.5 years, and hopefully kids aren't getting cancer.
Right.
And that's not even factoring in the cost of chemotherapy, which is
Well, okay, so that's my next piece, and maybe Doc, you have saying this is like, can you go to local allergists? Can you go to local immunologists and look at the incidence of certain types of cases and syndromes coming up? I mean, the cancer is tough because it's already kind of, there.
Yeah, presumably that could be done, but I don't know anyone who's doing that.
Okay, that's something that could be deployed into the
Exactly.
community. Yeah, because that, to me, that's very interesting. Is you start looking at incidents of asthmatic attacks, and I would presumably you'd look at that and say that's probably going to go down, right? And that would probably go down pretty quickly within 3 to 6 months, and then stay that way. So these are things that the docs in town should start looking at. And if you're a doctor who's local, who's listening to this, and you give a damn, maybe that's something you want to jump in on.
I think educating the medical community is a very big hurdle that we have to face.
Mm-hmm.
So I can tell you, we recently wrote an article for the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology about the fact that there are such things as obesogens and that they're an emerging threat to public health, and OBGYNs ought to be counseling their patients. And we got serious pushback from the reviewers of that. Why should I counsel my patients to go organic? It's expensive. What's the evidence that it's helpful?
Cancer was more expensive.
Yeah.
They want a smoking gun, and that's
right.
the difficulty. Again, it's showing what's invisible visible. So we were discussing taking the map of Irvine, and we contacted these families with these children with cancer, and just visually the impact of seeing the dots and the amount, and then put it against the national average.
Cancer cases. So you get the cancer cases.
Yeah.
There's a
Have
great.
you done that?
We started putting the map together.
We haven't done that.
Lori has
But
been
the 3
contacting
pins
families.
in my neighborhood, we found out after the fact that that 2 of them were in this condo community of 150 homes, where the practice was to spray Roundup on all the paved surfaces for weed abatement. And these surfaces were right next to the air conditioning units, right next to the open windows. And so you have the children walking in and out. All the homes are arranged around a central fountain. And then they're going to the park where 2,4-D and all these other things are being applied. And then they're coming home being exposed constantly. And then we also shared in our work some research that revealed that 2,4-D has been shown to persist in indoor carpet fibers for up to a year after it's used outside. So there's this myth that the stuff evaporates. Okay, it was applied over here, it'll stay over there. It's definitely not going to come into your house and you're not going to be exposed to it. But that's not the truth. You're going to be exposed to it long term. It's going to come inside your house and in dust and in carpet fibers. Live with it.
This kind of makes my stomach turn a little bit. I got to say, it's like how
It should.
far gone have we become to just not look at chemicals being sprayed right where our children play. And so I'm really sorry for the parents of those children. And
They've all survived, but they continue to live with the after effects, continued MRIs and behavioral, growth issues. Right. One of them came and spoke, an 8-year-old came and spoke at the Irvine City Council meeting where we made our case, and it was striking how short in stature he is, because that's just the fact. Is that these kids, they'll, lose their hearing eventually, some of them depending on,
They will have other cancers in the future, sadly. So the cancer therapies, one of the consequences is a different cancer down the road.
it's because your immune system's shot and
No, because the chemotherapeutic agents are damaging
to your entire system.
to cells, yeah.
Yeah. So we're talking right now about abatement. I mean, we've had a lot of people on the show talking about, eat broccoli sprouts and all these types of things to kind of help your immune system to stand a chance. But if your kids are playing on a sidewalk that's been sprayed with Roundup, you barely have a fighting chance. Like you're in big trouble. And so now the question is, so you guys, how much more work needs to be done here in this town to actually call this a slam dunk? Because it sounds like there's still some city council activity. We're still waiting on some votes. There's some petitions going on.
Well, the votes are pretty much in, but now what we need is these 230 HOAs, which accounts for the territory immediately around these homes. So the city is responsible for sports parks and medians and parkways and a lot of areas, 800 acres worth of parkways and medians and such, and then 570 acres worth of parks. So that's a lot, but still this area right outside the homes is of chief concern for us, and each one of those has to be won over on its own. We're working in that direction by working with landscaping companies and trying to retrain them, but it is an enormous task.
And people that aren't familiar with Irvine, it's very small lots, and if your neighbor is using Roundup and with drift, you might as well, it's like having it on
getting
your
it.
lawn.
So this is really close to home. I'm in a community here, and we're, it's green. I'm not going to mention it because I'm going to go after them and make sure they change. We have maybe 5 to 10 dead bees in my yard every day. I don't buy plants with neonicotinoids. I'm very careful about where we get our stuff, our nurseries. But the bees that are flying through my lot are landing on the neonic plants right down, the block, and so they're dying.
Yeah.
They're dying. And the way this city has been designed is, there was like the original kind of Disney architects that came in and said, we want to have kind of smaller lots and have public areas for people to play. So it's like, okay, I don't have a huge yard for my kids to play in, so let's take them to the park. And you're telling me that park is unsafe. That's a really challenging proposition.
It's the design. Irvine was designed that way so that your house doesn't need to be as big, but you can go outside and use the shared spaces, and yet you're going to be more exposed to it there. And there's also this fact of where we live. There's year-round. Our climate is such that things grow year-round, and so things are green, and so the exposure from someone using a pesticide like that is more constant than if you were on the East Coast and there's snow half the year and you don't have to worry about it.
So they're dormant. So they, they don't. But again, the fact that East Coast, I grew up in Connecticut, and the East Coast is so much further ahead, and it could be partially because, they have a longer dormant period. But, I guess I was ignorant because when we moved to California, I thought it was, a lot more kind of forward thinking as far as organic and natural, and so
Well, this is a blind
It is
spot.
in some ways.
Yeah, it is in some ways. I mean, there's a farmer's market, in every direction you look, but I don't care how much organic apples you're going to eat if you're huffing paint, right? It doesn't pencil out. So what was the community's reaction? Was there some sort of blowback at all? Were there people that are like, what the hell are you talking about? Or was it just like kind of open arms, like, hey, thanks?
We've been overwhelmed by people's gratitude and reaching out to us. We haven't had anyone telling us this is a bad thing, certainly. As far as one thing that was really instrumental at our city council meeting was that the pediatric cancer community and their families showed up in force. And it was upwards of 30 people signed in to speak and shared their stories and how they'd been impacted. So that was really powerful and something that anyone who's looking to do this in their town should
reach out to their local cancer charity.
Being very sensitive, of course, but because this is a group that's really affected and feels it so acutely. And sharing their stories is very powerful, and people have to share their stories. That's why each of our meetings that we had with our city council people, the mayor, before we got to the point of the city council meeting, with the school district and everyone, we all kind of share our stories for the most part. Because if someone doesn't understand your story, they don't understand where you're coming from, and they can't really care about what you have to say. So being able to articulate your story is very important. So someone who wants to do this work should clarify for themselves what it is they want and why. And what it is that scares them about this and how they've been personally affected.
But you guys didn't come out to city council with pitchforks and, kind of carrying the rally cry of like angry hippies and saying, no. Down with you, right? You came up with your science, you came up with your support networks, you came up with your groups. It was a really sane, methodical, logical play. And look at the scoreboard, you're winning, right? So what would you say to people who, I listen to this and I'm just like, I'm actually kind of infuriated. Like, this pisses me off. But I know that that's not the way you go marching into your mayor's office. So
Bruce, do you want to explain that? I mean, because we've had to actually separate ourselves as, away from kind of that approach with other people, and we're all working towards the same thing.
Right. So my perspective is that if you want to have credibility with elected officials, that you should stick to what we actually know. There are quite a number of strong links between agrochemicals and adverse health consequences, including cancer. There are some people who would blame Roundup for all the ills of humanity. Right. And personally, I call them the tinfoil hat crowd. They're not doing anyone any benefit, although they're crusaders. They believe they're doing something good, but they're not.
Well, they need an enemy.
They're harming the credibility of the movement, right? The movement is to get dangerous, toxic chemicals out of our environment. And you don't need to invent 100 different links when there are 5 or 6 or 7 strong ones.
That we already have scientifically in the literature.
Strong science. And the other thing that I tried to point out at the city council meeting was you are misinformed about what the EPA does. So I think the majority of public opinion is that the EPA tests chemicals, determines that they're safe, and then sets levels at which they're safe. In fact, the EPA doesn't test anything. The testing is all done by the manufacturer of the chemicals, who provides data to the EPA's, to one part or another. There's one called the FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act panel, and they decide, based on the company's data, whether a chemical is safe or not. And not surprisingly, they're all safe.
Totally.
At the end of the day.
Totally. So
that's
EPA,
hard to swallow.
So it just lands on some bureaucrat's table. They haven't done the study. They just basically look it over.
They look at the data and say, oh, it looks good to us.
Boom. Have your kids playing this.
Exactly.
But to get back to your point about being neutral in tone, because it is easy to be angry when you hear what's going on. But what happens when you approach someone in an angry tone and sort of accusatory and assign them blame for doing something like this is naturally they get defensive. Yeah. And just in terms of like how someone's brain works, once you're defensive, you're not in a problem solving mode. You're not in a let's solve this together mode anymore. You're in a, well, this is industry standard, and but that's not where we want to go. We really do want to solve a problem. So if you want to do that, then you need to just like point out the realities. And what happened was all the city council folks that we met with and the mayor were all grateful to us after our meetings. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I really didn't even know. So I think a lot of it is happening out of inertia and ignorance, and it's not like anyone wants to poison any children. It's just something that they're not even looking at.
Totally.
Exactly.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, look, everyone wants like some big evil bad guy to go after. And like, I'm not saying Monsanto's practices are probably, benevolent in all ways, but they're a profit-driven company. But at the end of the day, if this chemical harms my child, I am very interested in knowing what that is, right? And so if we have that data, it's great. There's actually a great book called The Emperor of All Maladies, which is kind of like this meta-analysis of like our understanding of cancer from beginning. And there was this part in there, and it's a great read if you've got time to do it. There's part in there where the people that were saying, hey, we think cancer might be caused by cigarette smoke, and all the kind of like top-down thinking was like, that's nonsense. There's been just as much proliferation of nylon stockings, and so there wasn't any kind of direct causality yet. So they're like, well, obviously cigarettes don't. And so we're at this point where we have this data, and it's growing, and we have this kind of accumulating body of stuff saying, what if it's all of it? What if it's all these chemicals? And we might not have a smoking gun on this particular chemical or this, but if you look at it in aggregate, there's something wrong.
Right, so one of the things that the battles that we fight is if you talk to the industry guys, and we present the data, they'll say, well, Professor Blumberg, your data are in animals, and it doesn't apply to humans, which is the silliest thing you can possibly say, because their safety data are in animals. So pick a position. You believe that animals are applicable to humans or you don't, and be consistent. Right? So if they're applicable, then the safety studies and our adverse consequences studies are both valid. If animals are not predictive of human effects, then their safety studies are not valid either. So it's a very silly argument. The second thing is that it's almost impossible to prove causality in humans, because you cannot do the kind of studies necessary to prove causality.
Autopsy?
Yeah, well, but that doesn't prove causality, right?
Sure.
You can say, oh, this person has a certain amount of chemical X, and that might have killed them. You can prove that by acute poisoning, but not for these chronic long-term effects. So we have to look at animals. So if we see that Roundup at a certain dose causes lymphoma in animals, you might reasonably infer that a comparable dose could cause lymphoma in humans, or at least have a risk. And that's the kind of studies that we have to do. Then you can look and say, in human populations, let's measure some chemical, let's say Roundup, for example, and look at the lowest exposed group and the highest exposed group and see, is there a difference? So that doesn't prove causality, but that suggests that the animal studies have relevance to humans.
And if they're playing both sides of that, then they can't do their tests on the animals.
Exactly.
Yeah. There is so much here. We're running out of time, and I really, my kind of success metric for this show is how you, as a group, have done this. Great. I love the fact that you guys have a feather in your cap. It's great for me because I live here, and that's wonderful. But I want everyone watching this to be able to say, wait a minute, what's going on in my town? right? So what are the resources that you've put together that are available? How can people start doing this in their own towns right now? Because if this starts igniting like wildfire, I am personally of the opinion that we're gonna start seeing a dramatic decrease in a lot of these kind of, conditions that are out there.
Yeah,
If they email us, we're happy. We have
Yes.
the playbook ready to share.
They should email us at
That's all they have to do.
info@nontoxicirvine.org, and we can share our playbook. Another thing that we've been doing as people reach out to us is matching them up, because this is a lot of work.
Match.com for
Yeah, so we have a
non-toxic groups.
spreadsheet, and so when we hear from somebody from, Modesto, we can match them up with somebody else from Modesto, so that they go in and they're not just one person talking about this alone. It again creates that feeling of conformity, like, oh, there are a lot of people who care about this, and then a lot more people to undertake the work. So that would be, a good first step.
And we've had, for the local groups, we've at least had, kickoff meetings, and we take them through the playbook, and we, build their logo, and, they're able to have questions. We answer them in real time. And then we also have conference calls for groups that are, on the other side of the country. And then the fact that in London, there's a non-toxic Camden was just exciting. I thought it was Camden, New Jersey. And they're like, no, actually we're across the pond.
That's
So,
fantastic.
it's just finding out what your city's using and what your school district's
Yeah, which
using.
is an important step, and in most cases it's not too hard. All you have to do is ask. That's all we had to do, and just email Public Works Department, in Irvine. I'm concerned about these pesticides. Please send me what you're using. And then someone on the other end, whose job it was just a clerk, is like, okay, we keep track of that. Let me pull the file. Okay, and then they'll just send it to you. And
But-
so this information is available.
But the
It's not-
problem is and we went through this battle with the city of Irvine, is they will list, but they won't list frequency and amounts. They'll put it in.
It's a big spreadsheet, and they show when and where and how much they used it. It does take some work if you really want to go through it, but at least you'll have, after a cursory read, you'll know if they're using 2,4-D at which park and when, and they'll know, what exactly. You'll get a clear picture of what's going on.
And your playbook will then help them
Yes.
untangle the knotted twine
Yes.
of like what it takes to actually make that
Yeah.
change in their community. Great.
By sharing things like, children are particularly vulnerable to pesticides. Pesticides are designed to kill things. And
So you have studies and you have
Yeah,
things that
And
you
a lot
Dr.
of
Blumberg
research.
has approved all of our research that we share. So
Right.
it's legit. It's not,
Questionable.
it's right.
Great.
Actually,
It's
because of
sound
the work that
science.
Non-Toxic Irvine has done, of all the people that I know in the scientific community, I'm the only one that lives in a community that's pledged to go organic
Great.
You're welcome.
because of the work you've done.
Thank you, Bruce.
Yeah, thank you all. This is really inspiring for me. This is the good stuff. When we talk about grassroots, the funny thing is no one's actually looked at what's being sprayed on the grass.
They have.
Oh my gosh, that's
Were you
funny.
keeping that?
I just kidding.
I like it.
Yeah, but it's just like, holy crap, like grassroots has been compromised, and so let's take the grass back so that we can, get healthy roots and go from there. So I want to thank you again. Email info@nontoxicirvine.org.
.org,
.org.
and nontoxicirvine.org is our website. We also have a Facebook page. People should follow us on Facebook, and there's a great resource on Facebook also called How to Create a Non-Toxic-Free Community. But if they follow us on Facebook.
Great, and we'll put links. If you're listening to this, just go punch it in. If you're watching this, we'll put links and drive them to wherever they
And
need to go.
we found out recently that Jane Goodall put out a quote in support of our group and to challenge other towns to do the same. So we'll put that on the website as well.
Great. My commitment is to make sure a lot more people put out quotes in support of your work. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you
Thank
very
you for
much.
having us.
Okay, so they did it. You can do it too. That's the moral of this story is, so what? Irvine, what is that to you? To me, it means a lot because it's close, right? It's local. It's where my kids are. It's where my family is. Where are your loved ones? What do you need to do to mitigate this exposure and get this crap out of the ecosystem that we are basically living in? They're going to help you with this. So nontoxicirvine.org, you can email them info@nontoxicirvine.org. They're going to hook you up with the science. They're going to hook you up with their playbook. Let's do this. Let's make this happen. It's our world, it's our communities, it's our children. Go get them and then email me back. Let me know what you've done, how you've been successful. Let's share information and let's get this in every city, every town, every state, every country around the world. Let's stop poisoning ourselves. Let's do this.